It's going to be pretty hard to get 83 years of living into 40 minutes, but I'll do my best and see how far we get this time. Born Elizabeth Lee Baker in Seattle, Washington, January 25th, 1907. I've been Dewey all my life. Back in the days before washing machines, we had what we used to call washer ladies who came in once or twice a week to do the family laundry. When I was a baby, we had a new one, and when she first arrived, she asked Mother if she had a little dewdrop. Mother thought she meant a little whiskey. And it was a long streetcar ride from Seattle out to Alki Point where we lived. When Mother went to get her a little sip, the lady laughed and said, "No, I meant a new baby." So I became Dewdrop until my siblings mercifully changed it to Dewey. My sister still says that she thought Dewdrop was a laundry soap, but I like my version better. This is my grandmother, Virginia Barksdale, at 16. She was a Southern belle from Yazoo City, Mississippi, and was born before the Civil War. She married an attorney, John Claude Pruitt, when she was 20 years old. They had 2 daughters, my mother Blanche and her younger sister Lillian. When the girls were in their early 20s, they moved west to Anacortes, Washington. At that time, they thought the railroad was going to end there, and the Golden Spike was going to be driven in Anacortes. My grandfather died when he was only 43 years old. My grandmother moved to Seattle with the 2 girls. At that time, Seattle was a bustling city in the 1890s because of the big gold rush in Alaska. Ships heading for the Klondike left from Seattle, crowded with people hoping to make their fortune. There in Seattle, my grandmother opened a very exclusive boarding house, selecting the young men carefully. After all, she had 2 pretty unmarried girls. This is one of the boarders was Richard Downing Baker, who with his younger brother, Fred, came from a well-to-do family in Philadelphia. He was educated at Swarthmore College and graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. There was a great scandal in the family in the 1880s. One of the brothers absconded with most of the family fortune and took off to South America, leaving a wife and son. Their parents were heartbroken and died a few years later. In the middle is my mother about that time, and in 1899, she and one of her mother's star boarders, Richard Baker, were married. This is my grandmother as we knew her, as our bum-bum. She was the only grandparent we had, and she lived with us all the time we were growing up and was very important to all of us. It was like having 3 loving parents instead of 2. In this picture, she is with my cousin and her first grandchild, Virginia Ward. Dad with my brother Richard Jr., my sister Lillian, and Mary Catherine, and me. I'm the smallest one. We had a big home at Alki Point in Seattle. Our property ran right down to a sandy beach on Puget Sound. Across the street on 59th Street was a big playfield and tennis courts. My dad taught us how to swim in the cold, salt water of the Sound and how to play tennis. That's it. Here's.
Oh, these are the next ones, though, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait a minute, I'm not quite ready yet. My 2 sisters and myself, Lillian, Mary Catherine, and me. These are the 3 of us again a few years later. My younger sister Jo came along 8 years after I was born, so she isn't in any of these earlier pictures. This is me in high school. We went to West Seattle High, which was just about 2 miles up a steep hill. We walked up and back, no matter what the weather, and often made the round trip more than once for movies, school plays, and dances. I had my first airplane ride then. in 1924. I was going with a boy whose sister was married to a stuntman, and we played hooky one day, and took us up in the plane. We buzzed the high school, did loop-de-loops, flew upside down, showing off. It took me quite a few years to overcome the fear of flying after that. After I graduated from high school, I went to the University of Oregon in Eugene. My two sisters had gone there, and Mary was still in school there. I tried one term at the University of Washington the following year, but the campus and classes were too big, so I returned to Eugene. Besides, I was in love with a boy from Portland who was going to university. He was Ted Lundy, Theodore Lundy, and he was a Sigma Chi and big man on campus, especially with the girls. My sisters and I were all tri-delts, and I made some wonderful lasting friends while I was there. Times were hard for both Ted and me at that time. We were not studying and learning much. We were just kind of fooling around. So we both quit school. He went to San Diego, where his stepbrother Victor lived, and got a job with a stationery store at $75 a month. I worked at Frederick & Nelson's in Seattle for nearly a year, saved money, and joined him in San Diego, and we were married July 12, 1929. This picture is taken just before I was married. We had no car, no telephone, but lived on love and $1 a day for groceries. The larger picture is of Ted Lundy, taken a couple of years after we were married. I couldn't find one taken when we were married. The next one is the two of us at Mission Beach. I'm the one with the long hair. His job with the stationery store, he lost, and we were frantic. The Depression was in full swing, but he practically camped on the doorstep of the man hiring for Standard Oil and finally got a job pumping gas at $125 a month, plus bonuses. So we thought we were rich and bought an old Ford and rented a little house. This is a picture when I was the only attendant. I have the big hat on there, for my sorority sister, Madge Normile, wedding. She lived in San Diego, and her father, Gene Normile, was Jack Dempsey's manager. At the time, he was world's champion prize fighter. You can see him behind the bride and groom. My claim to fame was that he introduced himself to me as if I didn't know who he was. This is our firstborn, Julia, born in San Diego and named after Ted's grandmother, whom he adored. Here she is with my mother in Seattle, holding her. With her are her three cousins, Virginia, Donald, and Richard Woodward. My husband decided he didn't want to work for Standard Oil the rest of his life. He had always wanted to be a doctor. So with the help of his mother-in-law and stepbrother, and later me, he returned to his mother's home in Eugene and pre-med. I spent the summer in Seattle with my family when Julia was 9 months old. We joined Ted in the fall in Eugene and lived with his mother for a year. In 5 terms, taking 2 summer sessions of 20 hours or more, he graduated and going from a very mediocre student when he was in school before to making Phi Beta Kappa. Ted was accepted at Oregon Medical School, now called Oregon Health and Sciences on Markham Hill. We rented an old farmhouse with a big kitchen and a wood stove, small living room with a circulating heater, taking up most of the space. We paid $17.50 a month for the house. But it was near the medical school, and we had no trouble renting our 2 spare bedrooms to medical students for meals and board, $25 a month. The first boarders were 2 men and a woman. The house didn't even have a washing tub. I did all the towel sheets for 4 beds, clothes for us and my 2-year-old, kneeling over on a pillow over the bathtub with a scrub board. On rainy days, I had to string everything out over the kitchen and living room. I cooked breakfast, lunch, and dinner for us 7 days a week. There was just a small mom and papa store on the hill, so without a car, I had to take the bus down to the Yam Hill Market at least once a week with 2 big sacks of groceries and Julia hanging onto my skirt. I would trudge back up to Gaines Street. Sometimes we'd luck out and get a ride with one of the wives who was more affluent. My husband was paid for assisting in the anatomy department during his last year, and he took a 5th year working for the Portland Medical Clinic before his internship. Now we could see the light at the end of the tunnel. So we had our second child, a boy, Theodore, or Todd Jr. So after 6 years of hard work, Ted got his MD and an offer of a partnership with the Eugene Clinic. We rented a house in Eugene for a couple of years, and another daughter, Cappy, was born in 1941. This is a picture of our 3 children taken in 1943. About that time, we got this Cappy, Todd in the middle, and Julia. About this time, we got caught up financially, paid off our back debts, and bought a big home. A few years later, we built a house for my mother-in-law in Eugene. This is another picture of my 3 children, Cappy, Julia, and Todd, with their loving dogs, Vicky and Limpy. This is my husband and me in 1948 in front of our Fairmount Boulevard home. The next 12 years were happy ones. We had the house remodeled, including a modern kitchen, large party room with a bedroom and bath in the basement. We and our children did lots of entertaining in that house. We had a big homecoming party every fall with as many as 100 people dropping by, and 5 or 6 couples staying with us for the weekend. This is Julia's wedding to Don Birch in 1952 with her brother and sister as her attendants. They left for Texas, where he spent 2 years in the service. About a year after this picture was taken, out of the blue, my husband announced that he was in love with his office nurse, who was just a few years older than his older daughter. He wanted a divorce. Losing a mate that you love by death would be devastating, I'm sure, but having to give him up for another woman would be much worse. It was not just the loss, but the terrible feeling of dejection. He moved out of the house, but didn't seem in any hurry for a divorce, so I let it go for several years, tried to drown my sorrows in booze. I decided it was time to get on with my life. So after 32 years of marriage, I got a divorce, sold a home, and moved back to Portland. Our younger children were both in college, so the first time in my life I had to face living alone. This is Julia and my first grandson, Todd, named after his brother, taken at our home away from home at 1522 Lake Street in San Francisco. Pete and Bertie Slauson were friends from college days, and we visited back and forth many times every year. This is the Baker family, taken on Vashon Island in 1964. It was taken at the home of my younger sister, Josephine, her husband, Adrian Cornette's place on the island. In their Joe's first, then Lillian, my cousin Swift Baker, me, Mary, Swift's wife Elizabeth, and his sister Anna. My brother, Richard, is missing. He died 2 years after this picture was taken. The Baker girls, as they were leaving on their first trip to Europe in 1968. The winter before, I'd gone to New York for the first time and stayed at the old Fifth Avenue Hotel in Greenwich Village for about 2 months. My son had gotten his master's degree in architecture at the University of Pennsylvania, where my father went, and was living in the village at the time and working at Columbia University. It was a wonderful time for me. Lots of live theater, ballet, concerts of all kinds. During the day, while Todd was working, I took long walks or rode the subway, taking in the sights of that exciting city. But back to my sisters and me. We were joined by my cousin Anna Baker from Seattle, and we spent 6 weeks in Europe. Besides all the big cities, we toured Portugal and Spain, cruised from Athens to the Greek islands and down to Crete. We went back another 6 weeks a few years later, this time just the three of us. That time we went down the coast of Yugoslavia and spent more time in Italy than we did the first time. We took a Mediterranean cruise as far south as Tunisia and South Africa. In Rome, we were met by my son and his bride, Maura. She was born in northern Italy, but went to university at Rome and spent a lot of time there because her mother and stepfather owned a condominium there when they were away from his business in Caracas, South America. Mara showed us Rome that we didn't see when the first time we were there. That time we just got the tourist treatment. This time we saw what it was really like to live in Rome. About this time, I started worrying about money. I was spending it pretty rapidly. My husband had been generous with me in our divorce settlement, and I wasn't worried until prices started going up and up in the early 1970s. He died 3 years later after our divorce, so he didn't know about the inflation. Also, I didn't have Social Security because his clinic chose not to work under it, and it wasn't until after his death that it became mandatory for everybody to go under Social Security. In any event, I thought I'd better not wait until I ran out of money. Besides, I was ready for a change, but not really qualified and too old for most jobs. I was 67. And I applied and was accepted as house mother at Oregon State University. I went with the idea of working just 4 years, that I needed to get my Social Security, but I stayed for 11 years. 3 children. Zoli, his name is really Dylan, but nicknamed Zoli, Monica and Justin, on their way to Saudi Arabia, where they spent 6 years. Todd taught school of architecture at King Faisal University in Dammam, Saudi Arabia. Right across the Persian Gulf is Iran. Every summer, the family traveled throughout Europe and India. And 5 years ago, I met them in Bangkok, and we had a wonderful time in Thailand, Hong Kong, and Japan. They came back to Portland for a short visit each summer, and a year and a half ago, they came back to stay. When I was 80 years old, my children gave a party for me. They had it in the summer, so the weather would be nice, because my birthday's in January. This is a picture of my 7 grandchildren: Justin, Monica, Jessica, Heidi, Zoli, Todd, and David Thompson. This is a poem my granddaughter Heidi wrote for me that day. January 25th, 1907 was the date little dewdrop descended from heaven. Perhaps then few knew the importance of this date, for nobody realized you'd turn out so great. I have you as my granddude, and I thank the good fairy, for you. With you I can play blackjack and drink cooking sherry. I just look at you, dude, and don't fear growing old, for your vitality and inspiration is worth more than gold. I hardly can believe that today you are 80. You're an amazing, spunky, spirited, and downright fun lady. Heidi.
Great. That's made a great